A coup d'etat is a sudden and illegal seizure of political power by a group, usually within a government or military, to overthrow the existing leadership or authority. It is typically a swift and forceful action aimed at taking control of the state's institutions and decision-making processes, often resulting in the establishment of a new government led by the coup plotters. Something that the people of Niger witnessed on the 26th of July as the latest country in the Sahel to be taken over by a military junta. In the last 2 years, Mali has had 2 coups, Burkina Faso has also had 2 coups, and others have had attempted coups, but a clear trend is showing coups are back on the rise. With more coups, we tend to also see an out with the French and an in with the Russian pattern. Let's find out why in this first episode on security in Africa. This is a 2-part episode on security in Africa. Part 1 focuses on coups and Russian influence.
I am an African.
Hello everybody, welcome to Africa for Dummies. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nathan. As usual, we have another great topic today, but before we start, be sure to hit that notification bell so that you do not miss any of the content, and as well as giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening to this to. It really helps us out to push the podcast further and continue to have such important conversations like the one we're about to have today. And I'm going to introduce my co-host, Mr. Zengi. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's been a while, not too long, but it's been a while, and we're happy to be back. Of course, we've got an amazing guest for you guys today. He is a highly praised. I mean, if you have a LinkedIn account and you're into international relations, you've probably seen his name floating around, especially on African issues, and which is why he's here today. His name is Fidel Owusu from Accra, Ghana, and he's an international relations and security analyst. He's the CEO of a security consortium called DefSec, and he's also been an associate of the Conflict and Research Consortium for Africa, if that's correct.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a privilege it's a privilege for me, a great opportunity that I'm on a big platform like yours. I appreciate it.
No, thank you very much for joining us. So the topics that we're going to get into today are specifically related to security and with regards to Africa. And I think that it's important to start with, I think, one of the burning topics, or one of the things that we've been seeing within the context of African security, which is that we're starting to see a significant increase in the number of coups occurring within the continent. And could you give us some of the underlying factors that are contributing to their persistence, and what can be done to mitigate their occurrences and to ensure that, there's stable governance? If you could speak to that.
Thank you very much. First of all, this is a very important topic because Africa has faced a lot of developmental challenges and a lot of underdevelopment as a result of political instability. Now, specifically in the 1970s and the 1980s, much of the continent was ruled by the military juntas all across. In fact, after the 1970s, only, or even the early 90s, only Cape Verde and Senegal had not had coup in the whole of West Africa. All the other countries had coups and had problems with development. In fact, even beyond West Africa, many other countries had that problem, except Southern Africa, where you don't see so much coups. Much of the continent had it. Now, after some time, especially after the end of the Cold War or the fall of the Berlin Wall in the late 80s to the early 90s, we saw some transformation And what was that transformation? The Cold War had ended. So the kind of global support that coup makers had, or the kind of sabotage that was encouraged by the presence of the Cold War was absent. And so many countries tilted towards democracy. So we found dictators that have been in power for so many decades trying to draft some constitutions and encourage liberal political systems. So in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, and the second decade of the 21st century, we saw some relative stability on the continent as far as politics is concerned, political stability. But in recent times, we've seen coups rearing their ugly hairs again. And currently in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Chad, and some others, we found military junta being in charge of the affairs of these countries. We've also had some unsuccessful coups in Niger, in Guinea-Bissau, and other countries. And it looks like the way the politics, domestic politics, and other dynamics are going, we are likely to see more of this, unfortunately.
Why is that?
You asked about why the coups happen. Firstly, it is about participation, political participation. In Africa, political participation is very much limited. Now, we have countries that are multi-ethnic in nature. There are only some few, very, very few countries that have monolithic ethnicity, like Somalia, let's say Rwanda, and some other countries. And even with that, you find internal divisions. So it is impossible for one particular group of people to dominate African politics without problems. So because of our diversity, there is a need for participation, to open the political system up for participation so that people will have a say in what happens within their jurisdictions. But when this has been limited, people have resorted to coup d'etats in order to have a say in their domestic politics. That is one. Two, the tendency for individual leaders to stay on after their terms of office have been exhausted. In fact, in Guinea, we saw President Alpha Conde. Himself, he had been a long-time opposition leader until he got opportunity in 2020. Later, after staying in office for one decade, a full decade, 2 terms, a full decade, he tweaked the constitution to stay on. The chaos that followed really empowered or encouraged the military to intervene and take over. So this was a civilian government that had encouraged a coup d'etat with its actions. In the case of Mali and Burkina Faso, it is due to violent extremism and insecurity, where the military felt that when they are in power, security is perhaps better than when civilians are in power. But when they took over, we found out that that is far from the truth. Again, some other coups is a sort of ethnic clashes. So I've already mentioned participation, but this is quite different because this has to do with the mere fact that two people from two ethnicities cannot really agree. And so one ethnicity politicizes or weaponizes the tendency of coup. So you find military officers from one particular ethnicity trying to engage in such a putsch in order to move away or to push away civilian government. And in the case of Chad, this was the son of a leader who was a military leader or a military general. And when his father was shot in 2001, that is Idris Deby, on the battlefront, his son took over and thereby undercutting or undermining the constitution, because constitutionally, it was the Speaker of Parliament who was supposed to, or the leader of the National Assembly who was supposed to take over. But then he tried to bulldoze his way through to control the country. So there are several. And again, the most important, socio-economic development that Africa is lagging behind with. Now, mostly when we talk of security issues, we look at the fiscal security. But one major thing is the socio-economic development. When the soldiers feel that you are not popular with the people because you deprive them of the necessary socio-economic development, they are encouraged to intervene or to come and take power, because then they know that you're not popular, and their actions would be largely supported by the masses. So these are some of the reasons for such coups. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because the socio-economic factor is very important, because when you look at the combined GDP of Sahel countries, so Sahel, for our listeners, is the countries that sort of cross over between the Sahara and the northern part of sub-Saharan Africa. So countries like Mali, Niger, Chad. I think the combined GDP is about 70 billion. So in context, 70 billion is the GDP of Luxembourg. So all of those countries combined are worth 70 billion. And these are countries that, there's a story of high potential. Many countries have a lot of potential, but the potential has been realized. So in terms of minerals, I think Mali has gold, and then there's uranium in Chad and so on. So I think my question was, is there sort of a fight for resources amongst different cultures within those countries, and how can you sort of link those fights for the resources? Obviously, these countries are not existing alone in their conflicts, and the coups, when the coups are done, it's normally in the interest of one domestic cultural group, but also at the same time, it's also international interests. What's the international, how do foreign actors play a role in the different sort of tectonic plates of who comes to power and who is deposed? The Niger is considered a French anchor state, a reliable partner for the French troops in that region. What is the case in countries where the coups have been successful, like Mali and in Guinea?
Yeah. So these three countries are mainly Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. Now, the two, Mali and Burkina Faso, are Sahel, and then Guinea is a tropical country. It has tropical rainforest, and actually the river Niger takes its source from Guinea. The Fouta-Djallon Mountains of Guinea flows upwards to Mali and then bends towards Niger. Now, this question is an interesting one because, as you have mentioned, all these countries have enough and a lot of mineral deposits. Mali does not only have gold, it has it in abundance. Burkina Faso has gold, significant deposits of gold. Currently, artisanal mining and other mining companies are working in these countries. Some have left because of insecurity. Now, how does the natural resource endowment encourage coup d'etat? Every political maneuver or maneuverings or any political event in Africa is somehow fueled by resources. And as long as people play in the political space, resources will be instrumental or will be critical to whatever happens. Now, if you take Mali, you realize that even the extremists are exploiting gold, where they tend to give some support to the artisanal miners in order to take gold in exchange. It is happening in Burkina Faso and it is happening in Mali.
So for our listeners, sorry to interject. For our listeners, the artisanal miners are basically just people that would be panning gold just for their own profit. And sometimes the words,
Exactly.
it could be a child doing it and so on and so forth. So sorry, I just wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. Now, if you took the Sahel, you realize that France has dominated the Sahel for so many decades. Before, even during independence, at the dawn of independence, and after independence. And in fact, the Sahel states all went into an agreement with France to be under the French community, where France has a lot of influence on the resources, the economy, and other spheres of life, including politics. But in recent times, Russia has also been a power. By the use of Wagner and other diplomatic means, Russia has also been a force to reckon with. So, in last September, the coup that happened in Burkina Faso, we found the youth hoisting Russian flags on motorbikes and jubilating. And that was a clear sign that Russia and its influence in Burkina Faso was very high. Now, France has lost that control because the new juntas that have taken over these countries do not want France's presence in the country. So it started with Mali, where Mali expelled French forces. And not long ago, Burkina did the same. In the case of Mali, Wagner from Russia took control. And from what we are hearing, Burkina Faso is likely to fill that vacuum with Wagner or some other mercenary forces to augment the efforts of the regular army in fighting extremism. So, in the case of resources, again, countries like the United States, Canada, Australia all have mining interest in the Sahel. And as you said, gold, uranium, oil. For instance, Chad has significant oil. It produces more than 100,000 barrels a day and has built oil pipeline from 8 southern territories through northeastern Cameroon to the port of Douala, where it empties the oil. Countries that are involved in some of these economic activities also include China, Taiwan, and as usual, France in the case of Chad and Niger. But in the case of Mali and Burkina Faso, it appears that the French influence has significantly waned.
Yeah, and I think the sort of now that we're drifting into sort of discussing the shifts internationally and how this plays on the sort of this rival for dominance or security, the security sphere of Africa. Let's just discuss Wagner for a second. Wagner, as you mentioned, we've talked about Mali and Burkina Faso, but one of the countries that keeps on coming up is Central African Republic. So I did a bit of research on the Central African Republic. It seems the president has been in power for quite some time, and Wagner has had its biggest footprint in the Central African Republic. Can you just give us an understanding of who Wagner is? Why? What is the linkage that Wagner has with the Russian government, the Kremlin, and what type of changes should we expect now that earlier this month there was that mutiny where the Wagner boss Prigozhin tried to reach Moscow in direct conflict with the Russian establishment. Now that that's sort of they're sort of not in the best terms with Moscow, what should we expect? So essentially, who is Wagner? What is this connection that Russia has with Central African Republic? And what changes should we expect?
So Wagner is a private military company that emerged after the invasion of Crimea. If you took note, you realize that in the invasion of Crimea in 2014, the men that were used in doing such or undertaking such operation did not have military badges or the Russian badges on their military uniform. So they were private forces within the Russian military. After that, Prigozhin emerged. Prigozhin had always been known as someone who was close to Mr. Putin, more or less someone who runs a chain of restaurants in St. Petersburg. And by his craft, he had won the heart of Putin. However, after 2014, he emerged as someone who owns a military company, and that was Wagner. Now, Wagner became very important in Syria, and then later we found Wagner in Africa, performing various activities and signing various agreements with African leaders. Now, what is important to note with Wagner is that they do not sign contract that involves cash. They sign contract that involves resources. So they give you security, and they are engaged in some mining, some timber activities. And in the case of Central African Republic, they are even engaged in coffee and other unorthodox trade that people do not know they are engaged in. And so that is Wagner. Now, with the issue of the recent mutiny, it appears that Prigozhin has agreed to lay back because of what happened. And in recent times or days, we have heard that President Putin has proposed someone to be in Wagner operations in Ukraine, which is very important to note. And perhaps this same person, who is a former intelligence officer, is likely to be in charge of the group globally. Now, a couple of days ago, Central African Republic's leader invited Wagner over to supervise elections, impending elections, or to help stabilize their country for elections. That is also telling, and it means a lot. So initially, the idea was that with the mutiny, Wagner's presence in Africa would be shaky. But I had written that because Russia uses Wagner as a foreign policy tool, it will be difficult for Russia to erase Wagner totally from the continent. So perhaps there will be a change in leadership. So a couple of days ago, we saw that happening, where he proposed another leader, or perhaps appointed another leader, because I don't think Putin would just propose. His proposal is actually a decision.
Yeah.
So that is very, very important. So basically, that is what I can say about Wagner. And they are in West Africa, as well, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and I don't see Wagner going anywhere right now. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. Coming next in the second installment of this episode, we talk about why so many countries want military bases in Africa and the development versus security debate. Don't forget to follow us on all of our socials, leave us a rating, and spread the word.
I am an African.